Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to the first of our webinars for 2025 Digital Infrastructure 2025, the Irish Opportunity in a Trillion Euro Industry. Just some housekeeping before we get underway today. Our format for today's webinar will be a chat initially with our panelists, followed by a Q&A session. Of course, if you have a question, you don't have to wait until we get to the Q&A session. If at any time during the session you think of a question you'd like to put to our panelists, feel free to input it using the Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us today on LinkedIn, one of our team will be live there to capture any questions you might have in the chat, and we'll put it into the room here to our panelists to answer. For those of you who are no stranger to our webinars, you know we tend to get quite a lot of questions. So we will endeavour to get through as many as we possibly can this afternoon. But just to make things easier, if you see a question that's already been posted that's similar enough to the one you'd like to ask, we would suggest you simply upweight that question. Also, for those of you who are looking to get a copy of our latest ecosystem report, we will be posting the link in the chat during the course of the webinar. Okay, so without further ado, I will hand you over to our moderator for this afternoon, our co-chair of our advisory board, Michelle Wallace.
Thank you, Tanya. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Peter, Maurice, and Anthony to come onto the screen. So you're all very welcome here today to Digital Infrastructure 2025, the Irish Opportunity in a 1 trillion euro industry. It's growing in front of my eyes. I suppose this is just a great opportunity for us to actually have this conversation because I started in this industry far too long ago. I know I don't look it, but it was about 17 years ago. And I went into my first interview not actually knowing what a data center was. I don't know how I got the job, but Digital Realty hired me. And really, the industry at that stage was very much in its infancy. And even our lives and how we lived our lives at that point was very different. The iPhone had only been, brought to market a couple of years earlier. But even, everything in our lives now has changed so much in that kind of 15 to 17 years. And I suppose, everything is done online, our banking, how we operate, how we entertain, how we socialize. It's all just completely changed in that time frame. And digital infrastructure is the foundation upon which all of that is built. So it's no surprise then that the industry has changed so much in that 15 years. And when I joined Hub in Ireland about 6 years ago, that was very much about attracting data to Ireland to build data centers here, to attract data centers here. And actually now the industry has evolved even more. Now, so much of the Host in Ireland partnership is not just on the market in Ireland, but it's so much more on the export from Ireland and the expertise that's been built up in this centre of excellence around Ireland. And so Host in Ireland, we're delighted to announce our transition to Digital Infrastructure Ireland. And I suppose today is a great opportunity to discuss where we are in the market. Why is this change timely? Why is it representative of what's happening in the market, both in Ireland and abroad and export? And so we have Anthony McDermott, Maurice Mortel, and Peter Lantry to kind of talk us through a little bit and give us a bit more context around why this is happening. And also, there's some kind of critical things happening in the industry right now that I think we're going to touch on as well. To Tanya's point, please use the Q&A, ask as many questions as you like, give the upvote so that as we're going through this conversation, we can actually see what questions are really important to you. So with that, we will kick off. So Peter, we might jump right in with you if that's okay. If
No problem.
you want introduce yourself and then answer this question. With the new government and the recent CRU announcement, can you just give us a little bit of what does that actually mean anyway, right? We've been talking about the CRU announcement for probably a couple of years now. Where are we now? What's actually happening?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and good to be on the webinar with the team from Digital Infrastructure Ireland. Great transition for everybody. I'm Peter Lantry. I'm the managing director for Equinix in Ireland. We're a retail colocation data center company. We operate in over 70 metros around the world, over 34 countries around the world as well. And we're probably the biggest interconnected colocation business on the planet. And lots of what we do is about connecting people together, connecting companies together, allowing them to do business. And one of the things we've been doing over the last 2 years in Ireland is looking very, very much at energy and the interaction of grid connections with our data center solutions. And there are some significant challenges in Ireland, and the regulator's been trying to address those by looking at connection policy rules. The challenges in Ireland are down to the grid infrastructure that's there and the ability of the grid infrastructure, in particular in Dublin, to cope with the pace at which the digital infrastructure industry is growing and demanding more power to do the workloads, the digital workloads that all the companies that innovate and operate in Ireland want to do. I was in a meeting yesterday where Microsoft was recognized, for 40 years of being in Ireland, and their first hyperscale data center was built in Dublin. So there's a bit of history there from an Irish point of view of building large footprint data centers. And there's also history there with regards to the grid operators supporting that for many, many years. And they've done a great job up to probably up to 2019, up to 2021, maybe. There was a great job done in facilitating those. But then there was a realization that the grid was under pressure and something needed to change. That's what's been going on for the last 2 years, and it's continuing. The regulator has just issued their proposed decision. It's not a great decision when it comes to the Dublin Metro because that's part of a constrained grid, and that puts us under pressure. So we're trying to find ways now to help the regulator to understand how we can support the grid as a data center businesses and still get grid connections. Because for us, it really is all about getting a grid connection that's appropriate and making it work together with the grid hand in hand. So that'll be something we can talk about during this. But yeah, the opportunity is significant for those companies that are able to locate their digital footprints elsewhere. Colocation retail can't, and that's for many different reasons. But the larger footprints, maybe there's some workloads that can be located elsewhere in the country, and that might work well. There is an expectation now that any data center will also produce a market playing generator, which is likely to be a gas generator. And that would be built in the same proximity as well. So that's going to introduce additional challenges locally, wherever they're put in Ireland. But this is something that we're going to see evolve very much so over the next 6 months, I guess.
Thanks, Peter. And actually, Anthony, I might just open it up to you there because Peter, you're very much on kind of data in Ireland, but you've got this wonderful view of Equinix globally as well, so you can see what's going on in other markets. Anthony, you're a service provider who is, exporting, but also you've got business in Ireland, and you're seeing kind of projects coming up on Ireland. How do you kind of see that kind of reflected in the local market?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. First of all, Anthony McDermott from Mitchell McDermott. So we're construction consultants, and we're across all sectors, but one of the main ones we focus on is mission critical, which data centers are a part of, and we focus on cost management and project management. So yeah, as you said, Michelle, we're delivering projects in Ireland and across Europe. But I suppose if we look at Ireland at the minute, as Peter said, the power is an issue since 2020-21. So there is a slowdown in new build data centers. But there are some opportunities there as well. There may be some other data centers outside of the Dublin Metro, which is the moratorium on it. But there's also a refurb opportunity there as well in terms of the older data centers that aren't as efficient. There's definitely a refurb coming there. I suppose if we look at Ireland as a whole, there's about 1,500 megawatts of data centers. And even if about 10% of those came up every year for refurb, you're looking at about 150 megs, and you're looking at 5 to 7 million a megawatt to refurb. So you could be looking at anywhere between 750 mil to $1 billion construction spend year on year to make these data centers more efficient. Now, the work itself, it's clean, I suppose, in terms of the suppliers who would be on this webinar. in terms of supplying the new equipment, but I suppose in terms of building and from a contractor perspective, it's messy and it's piecemeal, in that the data centers, they are trying to be kept live, and you're trying to do this work while they're live. So it's an opportunity there. There is work there, and it's something that is going to come up. But in terms of the large new build, unfortunately at the moment it's slow, if we just look at Ireland on its own.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And I suppose we probably won't get off that point yet until we also look at, you know, today's announcement around the climate targets potentially being missed and the impact for the country on that. Data centers are always brought into this conversation. I think it's important at this point, you know, to kind of address that. Peter, would you like to, you know, give your view on those concerns?
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. It is a valid question. How do you align the dual targets of climate action and reducing carbon, and also in a growth economy where digital infrastructure is ideally located, allow for more digital infrastructure which uses power? It's really, in my mind, about looking at the combination of the two in a way that enables the sustainable grid and sustainable power to be integrated into the grid in the right way. So I think there's a lot of talk now, which is correct, about how you might do that. You're going to have 22 gigawatts worth of renewable power available on the Irish grid in 2030, 2031 timeframe. That's the target. And assuming that is successful, that's going to require an appropriate use of that power. And that power is generally not always on. So wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. And that's the big problem that Ireland has. We don't have the hydro or the nuclear that allows us to have a steady supply of sustainable power all the time. So there's a disadvantage in that space. So what we have to do is become quite proactive in long duration energy storage solutions, finding ways in which we can integrate our renewable power, and when the power isn't needed, that we would then store that power and we can use battery energy storage systems, or we can use hydrogen solutions or other solutions. And there's some clever ones being looked at in the Irish context right now. And it's really important that the government understands and supports that, because this is how we will decarbonize. And what data centers always would say, and others would as well, even the professors who look at climate targets, they would say, if you want to decarbonize something, plug it in. So we're decarbonizing our transportation, we're decarbonizing our heating solutions, which, by the way, district heating from data centers will help. And we're also decarbonizing our industry. So that's all about then looking at ways to use electricity and then making sure that the electricity grid itself is extremely sustainable. We're already very, very good at that from a non-synchronous perspective. In other words, things that aren't synchronized with the grid. So that's renewable power in the form of wind and solar. We're the best in the world at integrating that type of renewable power. And we can go up, I think, up to 85%, or certainly 80% of that is allowed on the grid at any one point in time. We have to get to 100% that is allowed on the grid at any one point in time before we can actually get to anywhere near a decarbonized grid. But the fact that we're allowed to get up to 85 or thereabouts percentage right now is a good thing. It's a very, very kind of forward-thinking grid operation. Our biggest problem is that we need to create a scenario where when that isn't available, when that wind and solar isn't available, we've got to be using something that is sustainable. And that's the real challenge. And that's where people get worried about the use of gas, for example. And biomethane can offset some of that if it can be made in sufficient quantities. But it's the use of gas, use of oil, use of diesel, other things like that, that create the challenge, that introduce more carbon. And it's all about each additional piece of carbon, each additional ton of carbon is added to our overall climate targets. And it's likely that we will miss those unless we take the right action now. And that was recently reported. The kind of action that needs to be taken is significant increase in EVs for cars, significant increase in the initiatives around an investment in the grid. And there's nowhere near, by the way, enough investment in the grid. We need to be designing a grid that is suitable for 37 gigawatts of renewable power and other elements of power that are needed to support that when it's not there. So that's 37 gigawatt grid. And at the moment, we have a 6 gigawatt grid. right? So we have a huge increase needed of investment in that grid, way more than is currently proposed. And the other issue is at the moment that the grid hasn't been developed to take on board new data center requirements, because the question hasn't been asked, what is your digital infrastructure requirement? What do you want to build and where do you want to build it, since around 2019. So that hasn't been asked of the industry. And it's great that the new regulatory report is now saying you need to ask this question, EirGrid and ESB networks, of the industry, find out what they need to do. And then we can look at a way in which we can design a grid to suit that. But it's all very much a long-term view that needs to be taken in that perspective. But one of the things that data centers can do is we can offer flexibility. So if we're asked to put in place a generator, we can do it in such a way that it will make it flexible for the grid. So we can come off the grid. And there's an example of that Equinix has already built. We have a 42 megawatt grid connected site in Blanchardstown. We have it fully backed up with gas. So that natural gas is able to turn on within 90 seconds and we can come off the grid. And we do that. And we're actually signing up as we speak to the Beat the Peak program to service that. And that allows ESB networks to reduce the amount of power on the grid in a local area to enable the grid to be more resilient and strong. So that's a really important piece. And there's other things that Microsoft developed, and we're looking at them as well, and already delivering them within Equinix, is called fast frequency response, ancillary services to support the grid when it's under pressure. So these are things that we can do. And so if we can all work together in that way and support what the grid needs, as well as supporting our own customers and the digital solutions they need, we'll be able to come up with some very sophisticated solutions that help to decarbonize the grid. And the other nuance on this is that people don't realize it, but if you were to build a co-location retail data center, which a number of the companies within Digital Infrastructure Ireland would do, that actually helps to decarbonize the grid, because what you're doing is you're taking inefficient digital infrastructure from people's offices and you're actually putting it into a purpose-built sustainable building that is focused on decarbonization all the time. So there's actually a mathematical benefit from the point of view of overall carbon use or grid electricity use as well. So they're the sort of things that we're doing and can do. At the moment, we're just not enabled to do them because the policy isn't there.
Michelle, just one additional point there to Peter's remarks. There is an education piece around getting the wider public to understand those competing priorities, because as they stand at the moment, they look like they conflict each other. So you can't do one without the other. So if you can't build out new infrastructure or build new data centers because you're going to miss climate action goals because you haven't got the renewable energy coming onto the grid and the grid isn't fit for purpose. So it's kind of caught in that quagmire where we can't make a proper decision. But in reality, once we start doing that, the large energy users will be the people that will transform the grid and will make it more sustainable, because they'll take that power and use it on a kind of a flat line. It'll be used all the time. So but that's hard to explain, because some of the stuff there it can be quite detailed or quite complex. So it'd be good, it'd be good for us collectively to have a kind of a message that we can go out there to the general public and say, this is how this works, and this, you cannot achieve this transition without large energy users on your grid.
Yeah, and all the data center businesses are signed up to the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, and that Data Center Pact requires us to be climate neutral by 2030. So we're going to be investing, and one of the things we like to invest in, as Maura said, is the renewable power. So we'll be signing up to corporate power purchase agreements, as will all the data center companies. And the more that we can do of that, integrating new additional renewable onto the grid, the more that it will actually get built, because companies that are building renewable power want to know that it will be used. And the data center industry is the only industry that can grow at the same pace that we need to integrate renewables now in order to make sure that we are a sustainable grid and that we're meeting our climate targets.
Peter, can I just go back on this, because I think it's related to one of the questions. There's this kind of stakeholders and public opinion and not in my backyard type mentality in society. And you talk about power purchase agreements, and I think we often talk about power purchase agreements. I'm not convinced everybody knows exactly what that means. Can you just give us a really kind of a simple breakdown of what a purchase power agreement is and why it's so key for this?
No problem.
Yeah.
So power purchase agreements and corporate power purchase agreements, they're often called, are essentially agreements between a business that's looking for power and a renewable generator business. So a company and these are renewable power purchase agreements. You can also buy them with gas, but that's not necessarily what we're trying to target here. But if you do have a power purchase agreement in place with a renewable wind farm or solar farm that wants to build in the future, this helps them to finance their projects. So they'll go to their own investors and say, we have an off-taker, a customer that wants to use our power that we produce, and they'll pay for it to be built. And that allows us to get that onto the grid, and that will go into the market and actually be used by everybody in the market. It's just that the credits that go with the green power that's produced will go to the company that has the corporate power purchase agreement in place. That's the main thing. And the different versions of it, there's virtual corporate power purchase agreements, direct ones as well. But in essence, what they're doing is sort of promoting the construction and integration of renewable power projects on the grid. The government also supports many of these by using what's called the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, and they have auctions for those onshore and offshore, and they're also quite significant in nature, and those companies can also avail of that and deliver and operate projects, but those projects then are paid by everybody on their bills at home. So that goes on to the overall cost of having the grid and having access to power.
So the direct power purchase agreements that we're talking about here is incremental power, renewable power put into the market, in market. So it's not somewhere outside Ireland, it is in market, and it is incremental power that is invested by large energy users. And that investment wouldn't be made elsewhere unless it was funded kind of more publicly, in which case then everyone takes the bill. In this case,
correct.
Larger power users that are taking the bill.
Exactly, and there's a big risk. There's a big risk that all of that cost will go on to the bill payer rather than onto the companies that want to grow and use it. And that's something that will be quite painful for the person on the street to be able to accept, particularly if there's a big headline that says most of it is being curtailed or dumped or not used. We can't have that. That wouldn't be right. So that's why there's an important message in education, as Maura says, to get out there to explain, why demand is good, and particularly the right kind of demand is good, particularly if it's helping to integrate more renewables and using those renewables. So that's why it's an important piece of the puzzle. And we probably haven't done a great job as an industry of getting it out there and making sure people know about it. But this is part of that process.
Thanks, Peter. And actually, this is a great point. I'm going to go back to you now, Maurice, and I'd love you to introduce yourself, because we skipped over that bit. Introduce yourself, and kind of, with that kind of context, maybe you could talk a little bit more around like why this transition, what this Digital Infrastructure Ireland now is going to mean for the market and for, this kind of, I suppose we've got two key addressable markets. We have that internal market. We've got all of these issues around regulation and, new government coming in, are we going to be able to build or not? And then we also have this, vibrant export market as well. Can you kind of just give a little bit of a flavor on Digital Infrastructure Ireland and the transition, and what is this actually going to mean for the market as a whole?
Sure. So thanks, Michelle. Maurice Mortel. I'm co-chairing the advisory board of Digital Infrastructure Ireland with yourself, which is great. Last 25 years prior to that, I've been working as a data center operator for a number of different businesses. So I'm very, very familiar, particularly with the Irish market. Let's look at the where we came from. I mean, the growth of the transformation has been staggering over the last 20 years. Where we started off with the fledgling data center industry, grew into this massive European footprint that's supporting some of the biggest global companies right across the world, and Ireland became, an exemplar in that fashion. So in some regards, we've been victims of our own success, the speed at which we grew. We probably didn't acknowledge at the time that the shift to cloud computing, was going to have the impact that it had on the footprint in Ireland. A lot of those providers were already here, the hyperscalers and the retail businesses that Peter represents. They were here, but sort of supporting the local economy and attracting foreign direct investment. But the explosion in cloud sort of just threw all those sort of metrics out of the pram, and effectively we struggled to meet that demand, if we're being honest. Is there still an opportunity for us to support future growth? 100%. So let's put that out. I mean, we are still a massive footprint in the European context, and we're still viewed in that regard. And I think on the outside looking in, people are just waiting for us to try and get our message right and how we're going to promote the country going forward. But anyway, let's go back to DII. So, 10 years of hosting Ireland, supporting the message of promoting Ireland as a destination to host your digital infrastructure or your digital assets. So a job well done by all, fantastic, great membership, the go-to body in the industry to get the relevant information around what's happening in Ireland. But it's now matured. The marketplace has matured, the environment has matured, and there are significant challenges, as we know. And I think the group that we're representing now is it's two sort of a mix of cohorts, where we have the data center operators that are having serious challenges in Ireland around how they can continue to grow and how we navigate that difficult terrain, and then the opportunity that is outside of Ireland for a lot of our members who have grown with those businesses in Ireland and have exported those capabilities outside of Ireland. So it's really how does the organization now is fit for purpose, or how can it scale to meet all those demands? So it's a timely transition. I think the name is a perfect name change as well, because it captures a much wider membership base. Where we're still going through the transformation. So we'll be informing people more as you go along throughout the year. But for me, we're quite mature in that policy piece now. We've kind of got a pretty good handle on where it is we're headed with that and who we want to get our message across to. We've got some work to do on the response to the CRU document that we're working with Peter on, and a wider policy team. And then there's the other pillars that we mentioned last week during kickoff. So it feels like the right time. We may have could have done it a little bit earlier on the basis of the challenge we were experiencing, but to me it feels like it's at the right time. We've got good momentum. We've got new members coming in. It's really, really representative of the sort of the wider economic interest and support that drives the digital infrastructure industry in Ireland. So yeah, look, I'm really looking forward to it, and lots of challenges, but lots to be positive about, and lots to focus on.
Thanks, Maurice. Yeah, that's great. And I think in timing wise, with new government coming in, CRU coming out, hopefully, that timing is actually spot on. So we'll see.
And look, we saw last week with Minister Chambers coming in. It's an open door as far as he's concerned. The other two ministers in enterprise and in environment and climate, are part of that cohort of people that we need to get our message across to. And it also looks like there's a body within the Department of the Taoiseach, which are also looking to try and drive a lot of these infrastructure projects at a much faster pace. So I think we do have an opportunity. This will be the best opportunity we will ever have, in my view. With a new government, it's a strong majority, got a strong economic DNA built in there. It doesn't mean that they don't have climate action goals in there as well. They do, but we do have to marry them in such a way that we can transition from one to the other without causing, or scoring a massive own goal around our economic growth.
Yeah. Thanks, Maurice. And I think this might be a good time, because we're talking about, there are two markets. There are this, the Irish market and within the Irish market, and the challenges and opportunities that are available there, but there's also this export market. And Anthony, I'd love you to just kind of go in and maybe talk about how, what does it mean, I suppose, or do we have to have a vibrant market, an Irish market for Irish companies exporting, or, what does it mean now in terms of, for Irish companies? What are the opportunities? Yeah,
Michelle. As Maurice said, the data centers have been growing for over 20 years in Ireland, and there's a huge ecosystem of knowledge from top to bottom, be it consultants, designers, contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers. So there's a huge knowledge base there, and that has proven to be a huge success in terms of exporting that knowledge. We ourselves, we did a research paper there a while back, looking at the various metros across Europe in terms of data centers and labor and whatnot. And you kind of know this subconsciously anyway, but to actually, when you do the research, to see that 70% of the data centers across Europe have been delivered by Irish contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, and designers, it's really, really impressive. And it's something that the Irish industry should be very proud of. So in terms of opportunity, to echo what Mara says, there's a huge opportunity there for the Irish industry across Europe and beyond, globally. Even if we look across the States, North America, and Asia, Irish companies are delivering, designing, and building data centers. So it's a huge success story, and it's one that should be publicised in terms of a good news story out of the sector.
Yeah. And it's great, you know, we hear this anecdotally and we see it, right? You see it at an Ireland event, no matter where it is, or Digital Infrastructure Ireland. I'm going to do that now a lot. In whether it's in Ireland or in any market that we go into, like there's you know, the Irish are represented absolutely on every site, and it's great to have those numbers behind it, you know, to actually see it.
Absolutely. And they're hugely respected and trusted by the end users as well in terms of their knowledge and their ability to deliver these data centers, because, you know, they're complex projects with tight programs, so they need people to be agile and to move quickly, and the Irish have a fantastic reputation for that. And even if you look at Europe, if you look at some of the projections over the next 3 to 5 years, Europe is looking at growing 15% compound year on year in terms of data centers, and that's in the backdrop of 20% compound growth year on year on data centers. So as a sector, it's a fantastic sector for the Irish industry to be involved in. And you see in the headlines all the different companies in terms of their growth and their turnover and their employment. And like, although all these companies are working in Europe, you know, the knowledge hub is still based in Ireland, so it's still bringing income back into Ireland as well. So it's ticking a lot of great boxes across the board.
Yeah, great. And so the title of this is that the global industry is estimated to have opportunities of €1 trillion. Is that it right this time? You know, if you know, how do you see the Irish developing, I suppose, over the next, you know, few years and taking advantage of that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's do more of the same. Do what we've been doing. I think apprenticeships at contractor level and subcontractor level and supplier level is really important, and investment in that. And a lot of the large companies are doing that, and maybe the government, they are beginning to get behind that as well. I think that's very important. And I think from designer and consultant perspective, it's getting out into the schools, getting out of the colleges, promoting the industry, promoting all the skills that are involved, and across, from a diversity perspective, getting everyone involved in it. And because there's huge opportunities, both in terms of they're interesting projects, but also to travel, and you just meet so many different people. So I think keep doing what we're doing, but invest heavily in training and skill base, and get more and more people involved in the industry, because it is growing. And what is going to be an issue going forward across Europe is resources and skill base. There will be a shortage. So anyone that has the training system and people ready to go will definitely be able to take advantage of the opportunity. Yeah.
And if you look at, you know, you were kind of saying, you know, do what we do, you know, keep doing more of what we're doing. Like, what is it? Like, what is it? Why are Irish companies getting, you know, why are they involved in 70% of companies? Like, what in projects? What is it, like, more specifically about the Irish and from Ireland and that expertise that's built up here that's really kind of getting that traction?
Yeah, well, I think, and I'm trying to sound cliche, but the Irish have a can-do attitude, and they're agile. So, you know, if there's a project in the Nordics, if it's in Spain, if it's in Eastern Europe, wherever, you know, the contractors, subcontractors, designers, they all mobilize, they get the feet on the ground very quickly, and they just get on with it. And they integrate with the local subcontractors and suppliers and get them on board. And as I said, there's just this huge ecosystem of skill that's been built for 20 plus years in the sector itself. And again, the Irish are very trusted in terms of being able to deliver these projects, because they've proven that they can. Yeah, and I think they're the key areas why the Irish are so successful.
For anyone kind of listening in, Anthony, on and maybe Peter as well, for you too, for anyone kind of listening in, trying to kind of tackle those, those markets, or capitalize on this great opportunity that's ahead of us in the wider market. Any kind of thoughts on how they can leverage that opportunity effectively?
Well, from my perspective, in our experience, DII is a great group in terms of getting advice and contacting and networking and finding out, well, what did you do in this location and how did you do it? I think enterprise.
I just have to point out, Anthony, we didn't ask you to say that, and you're not getting to say that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That isn't scripted. But also, Enterprise Ireland is a great help. Like, they're a huge help as well. So if you're looking to go in country and you haven't been there before, obviously you can network with different contractors and suppliers and consultants that are there as well. But Enterprise Ireland have someone in each location as well, and they are extremely helpful in terms of getting to know how the tax system works, how the local economy works. So yeah, that's a huge help. And again, there's lots of data center events around Europe, and to just get to those places as well, that's a huge help. That's just kind of from a broad view, from our perspective anyway, Michelle. And also, a lot of consultants and contractors have relationships with clients that they had in Ireland, and they follow them then to these other destinations across Europe.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one then. To add to what Anthony said, certainly customers like Equinix and others who procure these services look for the consistency, look for the relationship to be a good one. They look for the consistency in the delivery. They want to know that they're getting the A team, and they want to also know that the teams are being developed and talent is being grown to be able to deliver on these things. And then it's just reliability across the board. And the Irish teams tend to be very good at that. And I remember when I was working in Hitachi Energy and doing some work for Microsoft actually asked the team from Hitachi Energy to look after their commissioning requirements across the entire European footprint, because they knew that they were going to get the right outcome. It was a consistent service, and there was a good relationship there. So that's something that they rely on. They have their own nuanced ways, each customer, for dealing with their own construction requirements, and getting that wrong is unacceptable for them. They lose time, they lose money. So they need to make sure that they're leaning heavily into teams that are good at what they do. So that's something that has been working well in the Irish context for many, many years.
Well, I'll add a little anecdotal story. So when you asked Anthony, why are the Irish so successful? So it's a great crack. But the actual, when I started building, or when I was working in the industry, and we did our first overseas projects in Eastern Europe and down the Mediterranean, it was really, really, really hard to try and find contractors, local contractors, to deliver projects at scale. And what happened effectively was that the Irish sort of ecosystem stepped up and migrated, mobilized, as Anthony said, very early on, took a big risk going out to new countries, setting up new offices, going through all the difficulties in doing that. But as a result, because I've always found that any projects that had to be delivered, there was a huge amount of trust required to deliver them, because it's critical infrastructure. They're hundreds of millions of dollars, euros projects, and trying to find people that you can trust to do the right job in the right location is very, very hard. So the reason that it has exported so well is because we started off when companies wanted to move into other locations and just took the risk with them, and I'd like to think now we're getting the benefits of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question here in the Q&A, because I think it's quite relevant to this part. As data center projects and campuses scale to meet growing capacity demands, what key commercial strategies can clients adopt to maximize value for money while managing the complexities of these large scale developments?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. I can jump in here initially.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of the businesses are doing are coming up with what they can do is rollouts of standardized design solutions. So if you can standardize design solutions that you can roll out and expand upon quite quickly, and have a source of supply chain already prepared and ready for you, you can achieve the delivery you need at the pace you need to do it. The other obvious one, I suppose the elephant in the room, is the grid connection. You got to make sure you have the early engagement with the grid operators to talk about what's possible, and make sure you do develop and design a solution. There's these energy hubs, these campuses now. One of the other questions is looking at other locations where there might be suitable supply of power. That all feeds into and is part of the mix on the importance of what type of construction can go where. For me, if you're in a location where there's plenty of power and you can get the access to the land at the right price, you can build out a large campus data center without any real issue. And then you can add on to that all the sustainability initiatives and investments that you need to do to make sure it works. And that will work well in Ireland. That's actually the model that needs to roll out when it's outside of the Dublin Metro and other constrained parts of the grid. But yeah, I think the strategy as well, from a commercial point of view, can be to try and engage with the end customer, the end user of the data center facility, to make sure you have the sufficient length of contracts. So there's a lot of that happening now is agreeing the appropriate length of contracts, appropriate service level agreements that allow them to commit the funds up front. There is a delay element to this as well. You're going to commit these funds up front maybe 3 or 4 years in advance now, and that's a harder part of the commercial engagement, but that's necessary to make it work. Yeah, and looking at other parts of the grid, certainly if there are companies that can do that. Retail, by the way, data centers that are co-location retail just cannot be located outside of the grid. It's really important to emphasize that they have to be located in the Dublin Metro, because they're part of the interconnected mesh system, and all of the customers that the companies like that would have, they want to be there, they want to locate there, and they want to be able to have their own digital equipment, it is their own digital equipment that they can point and look at and service themselves. They want to be able to turn up within a half an hour drive from their offices and look after that equipment there. But the more important thing is they want access to all the different network providers, all the different telecommunications and cloud service providers. They want access to all of that and have the option of what they do and don't use. So that's where it's so important to be in the Dublin Metro, and also the subsea connectivity to other locations around the world is all centered into the Dublin Metro, and they all plug into, let's say, these interconnection hubs, which are retail. But the other larger footprint hyperscalers, some workloads that are, for example, AI, large language models, learning models, those can be located further away. They're not doing the inference, which is at the edge, which is local again in the retail sites. They're doing the large language model learning, which can be further away. And that's where you have a real opportunity to develop larger footprint data centers someplace outside of the Dublin Metro. And the way the new regulation from CRU is shaping this, it is generally promoting the much larger footprints away from the constrained parts of the grids. What we ask is that there's also some consideration for those smaller footprints, the 10 megawatt sites that can be located in the Dublin Metro still, even though it's constrained, and then whatever rules are needed to make that work.
Okay, and so just to reflect that back, Peter, so what we're saying is that very large scale, hyperscalers have the opportunity to go outside the metro area because the conditions are better, but you just don't have a viable, you will not be able to bring the market base outside that metro.
They won't do it. I mean, even Cork is not on the cards for us for the scale that we would need. So yeah, it just doesn't work. And I did try, but within Equinix, I learned quite quickly. I've been here for 2 years in Equinix, and I learned quite quickly that it's not an option, no matter how much you want it to be, because the overall meshed solution that's needed and the ecosystem that's there in Dublin, it just can't be mirrored anywhere else. It's a strategy that was put in place very successfully 25 years ago by the Irish government, and it's worked. And now we need to embrace that and make sure we continue to allow it to work. But we can't just replicate that overnight somewhere else. There's a huge, and it's a country governmental effort that needs to happen to create an environment where anything like that might happen. But you still going to want to be in the Dublin Metro where the major industry and hub is. That's where the population is. It actually comes down to that. It's where the population is often enough. And we just don't have that at another location. So we'll end up putting another retail site in another country rather than putting it into another part of Ireland. But not all hyperscalers, by the way, can move outside of the Dublin Metro. There's certain workloads they need to have close to the Metro, and that's fine. They have some assets there already that can do that. What they need to be able to look at is how they can separate out those workloads and solutions they need, which don't need to be as close to the mesh grid with low latency. That's what they can do. We don't have the luxury of doing that. It's our customers' equipment that we're hosting for them in retail, but the larger players can do that.
Mm. Just very quickly, Michelle, just from another angle on the commercial, one thing that we've noticed that in just looking at the construction side, and especially on the large projects across Europe, a lot of the traditionally your client design team and your contractors, subcontractors and suppliers. Whereas now we're seeing, because there's such a huge constraint in terms of resource, there's such large projects and programs, such an issue, that it's your client and your contractor and suppliers at the top. And they're collaborating much earlier in the piece than they used to be able to secure slots to get these projects built and to get your equipment, because it can be a lead-in time of 12 months and 18 months and even 2 years on some of the infrastructure equipment. So we've noticed that it's flipped in terms of contractors and suppliers at client level at the very start of a project. So that collaboration is happening a lot more.
Very good.
Yeah. On the messaging piece, I was just going to say, you know, that point is very well made by Peter. I mean, there is a difference between the types of data centers, and that wasn't understood at the beginning when we ran into the issues. People didn't really understand what was a retail co-location enterprise data center that's in the middle of a city that's got all this network density, and a hyperscaler that sits maybe out on the outskirts that needs 100 megawatts of power. It just, that was hard for people to understand, and it probably still is. And we spoke this morning earlier on with Q4 PR that we mentioned last week around, you know, maybe a simple messaging document that sort of everyone can go to and to explain what those two things are and the reasons why it's important to have capacity in the city. And then I think the wider ask for us back into government is to say, what is your longer term strategy? Like, what is the next 20 years going to look like for digital infrastructure in Ireland? Because if the plan is to continue to support the industry, then you need to have a strategy around where that's going to go, what's going to happen in the metros, how you're going to support it with infrastructure, and how you're going to support it with energy. And what message then are you going to give externally to appease the concerns that a lot of the companies have, rightly so, that we're not really too sure where we're headed yet, and we haven't been very clear in our messaging, and as a result, we've lost our raft of opportunities. Doesn't mean we can't get it back. We can, but the message needs to come out sometime this year and needs to be very, very clear.
Yeah, and we need support from everybody. I mean, I see my brother on the call here asking a good question around what can other companies, software companies, do, for example, to help with this. It's telling the stories of what they are offering. Like each of the companies that are doing digital, providing digital services, software services and solutions, they do amazing things. They're offering services to society and to businesses, and we use them. So telling the story around how they need to be able to access every part of the digital ecosystem. They need to be able to access co-location retail. They also need to be able to access public cloud. And they need to be able to choose which public cloud. So they want to be able to have an option of different public clouds. They want to be able to make sure that data is located in Ireland. They want to be able to connect to a government data center, for example, as well, and government data. These are all things that we can provide as a service as an industry, but the actual decision makers in the energy space and in the government, they don't understand the why of it. So why is it important? And we should be telling those stories. Those other players, those other participants who use the services and procure our services should be talking about how important it is for them and their business, and then talking about what their business does, because their businesses are why we all do what we do. We're all working in order to provide a service to them. So it's really important that that conversation comes out. And some of those customers have had to say, look, you're not able to give me what I need. So I'm going to go to Germany, or I'm going to go to Holland or Italy or Spain or Madrid. And I'm just going to have to set up over there, or in Warsaw, or Sweden, wherever it is. And that's happening as we speak. And that's why the Irish building industry and the people who are able to build data centers are doing so well actually is because Ireland hasn't been able to facilitate all that growth. And over time, these data centers were going to expand anywhere around Europe. And the Irish have been really good at doing that because it started first in Ireland. So it's an interesting piece to it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good one there, just to look at like how can Irish companies then better position themselves for that international collaboration and expansion? Like how can we position ourselves to get more of this opportunity as markets grow outside Ireland and expertise grows outside Ireland? How do we make sure that, you know, Irish organizations, I suppose, have the edge in the future opportunity as well?
I'll leave that to Anthony to answer. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I think the Irish industry is doing that already, and I think the way they're doing that is, as I said, following existing clients, growing with them, then setting up bases in the various geographies across Europe, and then winning more projects in those areas. But again, without repeating myself, the resource piece is going to be a huge issue, be it at consultant level in terms of design and also contractor, subcontractor, and supplier. So the training piece and bringing people through is a huge piece that needs to be done if the Irish are to keep their majority share of the market. Because the market is going to keep growing. So the Irish market needs to keep growing as well in terms of the export. So I think the key piece there is the training and bringing apprentices and grads through into the data center sector. I think it's a big one.
Anthony, what particular markets should people be keeping their eye on in the next kind of, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, well, you always had the main markets, which was Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and then Dublin. So it was flat D. So they're the mature ones. But the likes of Italy, Milan, Spain, Madrid, and Barcelona, Finland, the Nordics, Portugal will as well, Belgium, Northern Netherlands. These secondary markets are going to come right up to the top and become the main market. So, and even outside of Europe, Saudi Arabia is going into a boom at the minute, and so is North America and Asia. So across the globe, it's huge. Yeah.
Everywhere.
I call out Poland as well. Warsaw is pretty lively at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, super. Thank you so much. I see Gary's coming on, so I will wrap up.
I might answer one question first if we can, Michelle. Elizabeth's one, it's got a lot of thumbs up looking for an answer to it, and it's a good question. CRU, the regulator, has indicated in the new decision that a gas power solution that's built together with your data center is a good thing, and absolutely it is a good thing. But the climate action plan and the target around that also requires that you're not using additional gas, and certainly in an islanded mode. So you can't get permission from South Dublin County Council to build an islanded data center. And there's good logic to that because that means you're going to be using gas forever. What Equinix was doing and the refusal we got from on board Panola was to try and get that gas approval to build a on-site gas power. But we were unable to get the grid connection in advance of that request. So the grid connection being unavailable to us has led on board Panola and South Dublin County Council to say, look, this is effectively an islanded data center. We can't give you permission for that. And I get that. My logic is it takes us 3 years or so to get this thing built. Yeah. I'm going to get a grid connection and offer flexibility to ESB networks, and they'll catch up on being able to do that within that time frame. And my hope and my kind of wish would have been to have had a grid-connected solution with a flexible grid connection with ESB networks that used gas as a backup to support beat the peak and other services. And that's the only reason we wanted that. And that's actually the only reason we would build that, is if we could do that. We wouldn't be building, and Equinix won't operate an islanded gas data center. But we needed to be able to get permission to build the gas in order to achieve that goal. And we just weren't able to get that permission because it doesn't hang together yet because the grid connection is not there. So if we can get the grid connection agreed, or some way in which we can see when a grid connection will be available to us, put that on a page and say that to South Dublin County Council again, say, look, now we have a line of sight to a grid connection. The rules from the regulator allow us to do that, which they don't right now, by the way. Right now, they're continuing to say, don't build it, don't allow the grid connection. Then you can use gas or another source. You could use a hydrogen backup. You can use other backups to support that data center. And it's actually to support the grid, so it's flexible on the grid where the grid is constrained. So that overall vision isn't being seen by the planners, and isn't accepted by them yet, which I think is a real pity, obviously, because it's what we're looking to do. But it's the way in which you have to ask for these things. You can't say what I'd like to do is. They say, what is it you can actually do based on what you've been allowed so far. So it's not about your ambition, it's more about what's physically in front of them. So they had to make the decision based on that, which is, I guess, maybe a flaw in the whole situation, because it doesn't allow you to move forward. You're in a stalemate until the catch-22 of the grid is sorted out. I'll let you finish up now.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks,
Thank
Peter. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Maurice. So it's been really interesting listening for once. And I listened intently, particularly when Maurice, Peter, you started off by saying Microsoft 40 years yesterday celebrated. So we can blame them, because this is, you can't see it there with a green screen, but I'm holding up floppy disks. That's often the why. People ask us often, why Ireland? Why are you not flappy? Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, big financial bourses. So how did Ireland get involved? Floppy disks since 1985. So that's an anniversary that we can look at. The other that we can look at for those listening as to why was today, would you believe, 25 years ago, Ireland was recognized by the OEDC as the largest exporter of software in the world, because we were the center of the universe for localization. So we used to take all of that code, put it onto CD-ROMs and export it. And that's the why we've evolved to 2025, by being a leading data center location. I liked what Peter, your brother, said also, Michael, in that there's two words in data center: data and center. Ireland is here because of our data. The floppy disk was only the center back 40 years ago. We have to look at why Ireland still remains a really attractive place for foreign direct investment. It's because of the substance, and we need substance. And the data in the center is actually being monetized and exported, same way as the floppy disk was monetized and exported. You are being terribly nice, Maurice, by saying that we've been doing this only since 2019, 2020. We've been at this now, another anniversary. This month is 10 years since Athenry. 10 years since Apple decided to go to Athenry. And I'll be frank, we've been lurching since then. We've been trying to get ahead of it since then. And frankly, I think it's okay to say we've been trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And we have arrived where we've got exactly the result we expected, which was not moving forward. So I think what we're enthused about, what we're actually cautiously optimistic about, was in the CRU's recent commentary, where 19 times state-led was mentioned of some sort. Now that's an all agency, all department, collective coming together to look at what we want to be in this space. Peter, you mentioned it. You can get something from CRU, but you're not going to get the planning from the planners. So it's actually not moving it forward. It's just moving it out of one department and into the other. Anthony, 70% around Europe of projects have Irish involvement. Whilst that's great and wonderful, only yesterday we saw one of those leading companies announce 40 people laid off in Ireland, 150 people being taken on around Europe. So what are we doing? We're exporting our expertise. Go to the airport, particularly ZZ and ZP in the long-term airport on a Monday morning, and observe the amount of white vans from all over the country. They should be in Ireland. They're getting planes to Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, and Paris. So it's great. And I think my favorite thing about why the Irish are doing so well, it was told to me by one of the leading companies, because everybody speaks English until there's a problem. Right? Since Brexit, we're the last ones that can't hide under a rock and have a secondary language. So I'd like to leave it by actually paraphrasing what we said to the minister last week. And for the listeners, a long, long time ago, I wasn't even born, the 1850s, to get information from America to Europe took on average 6 weeks. The common held view was we need faster ships. But a Wicklow man decided that he was going to run a cable across the Atlantic using the stars as his guide and ropes with knots as the depth. He did it. So what we'd be saying to the government now is anybody that comes in suggesting faster ships is not what we need. We need people to come and present, we need to run a cable equivalent across the Atlantic. Let's be brave and ambitious. Let's not talk about it. Let's actually do it. So with that, I think we're done, Michelle. Thank you so much, all of you, for your excellent contributions. It's the start of a discussion. We'll keep it going. And thank you so much from Digital Infrastructure Ireland. I nearly said host in Ireland, but anyway, thank you so much, everybody.